we're going to go ahead and get started because I have right at noon. Couple of things. November 12th is a day change, and it's at West Pavilion. Is our next research seminar / special topics in clinical research. OSP is going to do a workshop. They're going to divide us up in groups, and the staff is going to come and teach us how to fill out forms and stuff like that. It's going to be real important that if you have specific OSP questions, please email it to christraining@UABMC. We will get it to Renee and Benita at L staff, and they will have answers to your questions. We have not received many questions, and I know there's got to be questions out there. So please, I'm begging, please get those in so we can get it to them and they can prepare answers. I think this is going to be a really good workshop. So that is November 12th. You do need to register for that one because they're limiting the groups where they can do really kind of one-on-one training. They don't want 50 people in one room. So that is coming up November 12th. Then I'm going to scroll it down a little bit. HIPAA training and email. November 21st, Terry Sharp is going to come talk to us and tell us the do's and don'ts. She has also asked for specific questions. So again, if you will email Chris Training, we will forward your, or if you want to email Terry directly, that's fine too. But we will get those questions to her and she will have answers for us on November 21st. Also on November 21st, we have a research orientation 4-hour class. So if you're new to research, new to UAB, this is a good overview of research here to give you contacts, how to register for classes, different things like that. That is from 8 to 12, same place in PCAMS, registration is required. And then December 5th is our next research seminar, and we have self-help, stress through the holidays is going to be the topic. Then our next lunch and learn is December 10th. So if you'll write those dates down, that would be great. And I'm going to turn it back over. I'm going to pull up your.
Can I come to the 21st?
You can come to any of them. We would love to have you.
And the fact that I want to go to that means you want to go.
We're really excited because these are questions that somebody in the audience brought to our attention. So if you have any topics, we're planning, we've already gotten some commitments for January, February, and March, and then we'll start planning April, May through June. I think we take off July and August, or we take off July, I think. That's the only month we take off. But please, we will try to get speakers for you that if you have any educational requests, that's what we want to do. And then Carrie and Dorothy have agreed to come back and to do another session with us. So we'll be repeating this. So we just appreciate y'all. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all. And here's your clicker.
So how many people were at the PRAF one? So pretty much everybody was at the PRAF, but not everybody. But that took me all the time. And it was supposed to be on PRAFs and IPRs. So I'm going to go on to the IPR because we just never got there. So let's find our spot. This is why it took us so long. Okay, so when we got to the IPRs, we basically talked about item 5. So we had planned on going over all of these things. We just didn't. So we'll start with some general notes. The form has changed slightly and will be changing again, per usual. And so just try not to use templates. It'll mess you up, especially on IPRs, because there are so many things you do have to change because it's what's happened this year. And that is a really common thing that we end up going back to you for, where we say, well, you said you enrolled 4 this year and you have a total of 6, and last year you enrolled 4 and have a total of 6, so that doesn't make sense. So it's a template error. So just be very careful. I mean, you can obviously use the template from the year before, but be aware that there is, that there may be changes. And we announce when the forms have changed.
How do you announce when the forms have changed?
The listserv.
I don't get an
I
announcement.
don't either.
Well, then are you on the, you have to be on, you're
I'm
on the listserv.
I have to just find it on the
Okay.
website, but
I'll make sure I didn't just lie.
yeah, well, it would be good if we knew,
It would.
and it would be good if we had a track changes
We've
version of the changes.
We've started doing that so that you can see them. We haven't really decided when those should come down, so they just kind of hang.
Right.
But we started doing that recently, was with the last few changes. I can tell you the exempt form just underwent massive changes. There was a snafu in our office, and someone published the form without publishing all the ancillary information. Like there is now a sample information sheet for exempt, just like there's a sample consent form. And there was this lovely announcement that was created that wasn't, it was just a snafu. So that actually got published without anyone, including me, knowing it. But that happens, we're humans. Expiration dates. So check the IRAP summary for the expiration date, because especially if you have full board, the way we do, let's say you have a full board protocol that goes to the board, and it goes to the board on October 30th, and you got, this looks good, we need some, it's approved with additional information required. And so then you have a baby, and you don't get to it for the next 3.5 months. And you finally give us the changes. Your protocol dates and your approval dates on your letter are going to look a little odd, because it was approved yesterday, but it wasn't issued until 3 months from now. And your expiration date is 1 year from yesterday, not when you got it. And so a lot of people get those mixed up, and they put when they got the approval letter date. But that's not necessarily the approval date, unless we reviewed it yesterday and sent you the letter yesterday. I see a few knitted brows. Does that make sense? Okay, so just be clear on that, that there's some unusual dates out there, and so we see a lot that the expiration date is incorrect. The participants grid we talked about last time, but I'm going to go over it again since it's on the slideshow. So the 5 and the grid, that's the worst for everybody. And I brought it to our management team, and because I went around and said, hey, Leslie, what do you put in 5A? And she told me, and then I'd say, hey, Vanessa, what do you put in 5A? And she told me, and I ended up with about 5 different answers. And nobody knew. And these people have been there 16, 20, 25 years. Then I went to the people who do renewals and asked them, again, 5 different answers. So I don't think anybody knew. I think that's actually the end of that sentence. I don't think anybody knew. And I don't think anybody knew that nobody knew. So now we know that nobody knows. And so I brought it to the management team meeting, and we sat down and discussed it. And that's when everybody went, what? You do what? You do what? And so we kind of came up with a plan. That plan has not been implemented, and that plan is not necessarily the final plan. But what I want to tell you is what the plan is, because then you can tell me, ooh, that doesn't make sense. So I know you guys heard it last time, but I'm going to bring it up again just because I want it to, before we decide this. we're going to change the questions a little bit, and we're going to change the definition of what we previously called enrolled. Because that's been the crux of the problem. What the heck is enrolled? When are you enrolled? So we're going to change 5A to say the number of participants entered, and we're defining that as either data or biospecimens collected with a waiver without consent, or participants who have consented. So entered means consented. Now, consent can occur for screening, and then they screen out. But entered means consented. Now, a lot of you actually give us that number. The problem is our next question makes us confused. Our next question doesn't help us resolve the fact that you may have entered 120 in order to get the 100 that you told us you needed on your HSP. So when we see 120 currently in 5A, but the HSP 16A says, I need 100, we automatically come back to you because we don't know why those numbers don't make sense. So our next question is going to be total number of participants entered into the study via consent whose screen failed. Now, I'm not going to tell you this is actually how they're going to be worded, but this is the intent of the question. So you got 120 in 5A, and you're going to tell us 32 in 5B, and now we can do the math. Actually, let's just go with 30 because it can't do the math. So you have 130 and 30, or you have 130 and you have 40 here, then we know you're only at 90. We can do that math. You're only there. Then we ask the total number of participants entered into the study via consent who withdrew. So B and C are going to help explain the discrepancies between A and 16A. Did you follow me? Mm-hmm. That's the plan. Because that's what's hard now, is we don't know why you're not, we don't know what your number means. And then we're going to ask the same question that we always ask. Then when you get to the grid, any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? Yes?
I think I asked this last time. I have trouble with withdrew, defining withdrew.
Right, and I asked about that.
Yeah.
And withdraw is whether they say I'm withdrawing or they don't show up again, that's still a withdrawal.
Okay, even though we're using their data and everything from whatever visits they completed.
Well, that is normally something you should explain in the consent.
Okay.
So if you are counting them, the better way to think of it is, am I going to replace, would I want to replace that person?
Replace. Okay.
So if you are using their data, you're not replacing them.
Okay. Okay.
You're just using what you got.
Got it.
Now, until we settle on this final rule, the questions remain the same. And my guidance to you is to know that we're comparing 5A and 16A. So if those numbers don't make sense, explain them for right now. There were 17 screening fails and 5 withdrawals or something like that. Explain it to us and that will stop that back and forth. Now for the grid, it should reflect the number and successfully entered into the study. In other words, the numbers we want to know, we look at that table. So the Belmont principles, who's heard of the Belmont report? I hope you all have. The Belmont principles are beneficence, respect for persons, and those are the biggies, everybody knows those, but then there's also justice. And 5E fits into the justice criteria very heavily. 5E tells me we're opening this up to anyone or reasonably anyone. This is telling us, yes, you're enrolled, you know, we're this opportunity for research, and that's how we look at it. And especially if you're doing clinical trials, it could be life-saving stuff for them, that we are sharing that wealth, and it's not just a whole bunch of white men. So we want to know, how did you open this study up? We also look at this to say, you said you weren't enrolling children, but here's a 14-year-old. We've had that probably 5 times a year, where the study was never approved for children and they enroll children. So that demographics, we really are looking at it specifically speaking to that justice component of the Belmont report. But a lot of people like to check no demographic information, and what they are really interpreting that is, I think they're thinking 5D is, would you like to volunteer this information to us? And unless you're doing, you know, like a retrospective chart review, maybe you don't have that information. But almost any prospective study, you're collecting that information. It may be a drag, but you're collecting it. We see a lot of no demographic information collected from like phase 3 clinical trials and stuff. Like, for real? Or, you know, these 20-year longitudinal studies. Like, you don't know how old they are? How is that possible? And they do, but it's a drag to figure it out and to get it all together. So just, the board will call you out. They have done it many times. I don't believe you, provide it. And lo and behold, it's there. So when you are starting your study, have a mechanism in place so that that is easily gettable and you don't have to dig heavily and beg, borrow, and plead at the last minute. Really plan for that. It is the justice component, and if you're not familiar with that, you should be, because clinical trials or human subject research for the longest time has not kept justice in mind. We are still terrible about Spanish consent. Our population in Birmingham has a very high rate of Hispanic population, and people just don't want to, because it's a drag to get things translated and use the short form and everything like that. And we have people on our board who aren't playing about that. So this is a really, really important ethical, believe it or not, an ethical issue. So if you have it, give it, because we really need to know. I just wanted to say that. The last, and I didn't say that last time, but we've been training some new people, and we've been really focusing on the Belmont report, and I think it's important for people to realize how really small components actually speak to those 3 basic fundamental principles of human subjects research. This right here does it. I'm suggesting to split them out because a lot of times you have completely separate populations. You may have a parent population and a child population, and this helps us kind of see where you might have a physician population and a patient population, and this just kind of helps us see how it's broken out. So even though it's not on the form, I suspect it's going to be, because the board has started asking for this, even though it's not required, and so now I think it's about to be required.
So are you saying you want us to copy the grid and for each?
Or the form will probably change to provide you opportunities for that, or copy it. It probably doesn't matter if the same things are happening to the same population. We've kind of created a concept in IRB over the last year called participant group. And I don't know if you guys have seen some of your approval letters with a table at the bottom. Has anybody seen one of those? Not everybody will, but we've realized that we have an application that says, how are you going to recruit? Are you going to consent? Are you getting HIPAA waiver, or are you actually getting HIPAA authorization? And they're single questions. But what if your study is, I want to talk to physicians and I want to talk to patients? Well, the physicians, you're not going to get HIPAA authorization, and the patients, you are. Maybe you're going to do a survey with the physician population, but you're going to draw blood and get medical data from the patient population. Well, here you could get a waiver of consent documentation, but here you could, maybe this group contains children and this group doesn't. So we realized that we needed some concept of a participant group, a way to look at kind of mini studies within a study, so that we could say, well, this is a CR01, this has no children. They have a waiver of consent documentation, they don't. They have a waiver of HIPAA, they are getting HIPAA. So that when we see HIPAA waiver, and then you submit an amendment 10 years later and say something, then we know, oh, that group had a HIPAA waiver. This group did not. It saves us a lot of time. So we started creating this concept, and that's what that table at the bottom is a way for us to kind of say, where do those
approvals are,
what those components are. And this is kind of the same concept that they want, is to, if you really have like two discrete participant populations, and by that we mean groups of people who will have a different experience than other groups of people. And that can mean even a control group and a treatment group. Because if that's a minor population, if that's children, then let's say it's children with cystic fibrosis, and the control group is children without cystic fibrosis, and you're doing an X-ray. When we start looking at what the children's risk category is, the control group is actually at a higher risk, because what's happening to them is strictly risk with no benefit. Whereas the second group could be risk, but with benefit directly to them. So we may even have to parse those out. We're not suggesting that you do this here, but that's kind of the concept of a participant group, is who's having kind of a different experience IRB-wise. That's probably more than I intended to go into, but it's important to think of it that way. Problem summary form. So first of all, this is cumulative. Yes?
Sorry, can I ask one more question about that?
Yes.
We do a lot of observational studies, and we'll enroll patients, and that's the grid A through B that you're talking about. And then somewhere in the study, they'll talk to another investigator at another university or whatever, and they want to use their data as a control. And they're like, oh, we'd love to have that data. Can you send us that data? So we'll submit it and then get that data brought here in whatever agreement we need. But then I've got now these additional records of information. And do I add, so say we get this group we've enrolled 100 people, but we get 50 records from somebody else. Didn't do our study, but it's just a reference for analysis, basically. Do those get added in A through E, or do I do separate tables for a data set versus participants?
I would think you could do them as one.
Okay.
They're not, the only difference between them is where they came from.
Where they came from, yeah, and they may not have anything to do with the protocol other than they're being analyzed. They're imaging.
I would suspect you could do them as one.
Okay.
You're getting candy. And anybody who's coming in on Zoom, if you have any of these questions, I suspect we're going to have time to answer them. And we'll check real quick if there are any.
I see one. How do you join the listserv?
Well, if you are on a protocol, you have been automatically added to the listserv. It goes out to everybody who is on a protocol, whether you want it or not. So you're already on it, I will say we have a history of not using it, but Adam McClintock is gonna fix that.
Okay. So Paige, if we didn't answer it, will you let us know? Can you hear us?
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.
I'm giving you a virtual piece of candy.
Yeah, if you'll just let us
Come
know
by my
or
office.
unmute yourself and say yes or no. Thank you for asking. Right, here we go.
Okay. Yes.
I'm a new program administrator, and so do I need to be on the listserv?
You're a new program administrator. Do I need to be on the listserv? I'm saying it out loud. Are you on a protocol of any kind?
I'm going to be assisting with IRBs, so
Will you be a delegate? Then you'll be on the listserv. So this, the PSS is cumulative. So this is another one that we don't have, like, I wouldn't say that this is like rampant, but there are a whole lot of rampant problems with the IPR. Question 5 obviously is a mess, but the rest of it is just you guys getting real creative. But the PSS, the problem summary sheet, so there's just a couple of things I'll go over. This is, make sure it's cumulative. Most people submit it that way, but there are some people that only submit that year, or they submit it cumulatively, but they do year 1, and then they do another PSS for year 2. So who knows why we have that form? Come on. Why is that? Why do you have to fill out that form? Anyone? You?
To see how the people are in the study, how they're faring.
It is. So table A is stuff we already know about, but it comes in dribs and drabs. Like we'll get one reportable problem here and one there, and that person may process that one, and that person may process that one. And let's say you have 10 over the 5-year span of reportable problems that they've already been handled, but all over the place. This is the one place where we get to see them all in one place and go, oh, they were all data breaches. Maybe we need to check in with that team. Or, oh, they had 7 deaths. Maybe we should discuss that. So it's the only place we get to see, even though they've been reported, all of them together. The second one, table B, is non-reportable problems. And what we look for there are trends. Trends that may affect the risk-benefit ratio, trends that may affect the IB or labeling or something like that. Suddenly, everyone's getting dizzy. And no one knew everyone was going to get dizzy. So it's a way for us to look at those trends. Now, what goes on them varies because some sponsors want you to put, they had a hangnail. And some sponsors say, I only want to know if they die. And then everywhere in between. So that table B can be really long for some people and really short for others, and that's fine because we know that sponsors can be crazy. But it is cumulative so that we can look at the whole thing. And we want to know what that cumulative date is, and we need a date, like year, month, day, or day, month, year. July 4th, month, day, year. I get caught up with the naming convention and IRAP, and so it's month, day, year I have right there. So don't just say July 19th, no, 2019. We want to know the actual race. You'll actually get that kick back from time to time. And the last thing is, please don't revise it. We do see that quite often. So the sponsor has their needs, and you're going to be sending stuff to them, and that's fine. But this is our need. And I know it's tempting. I understand why it would be tempting. But if you change ours, we will make you change it back. So as tempting as it is, you are doubling your effort. We will make you change it back. In fact, I can say this to be true everywhere. Do not ever revise any of our forms. I see this mostly from students who will go, well, that question doesn't apply to me, so I'll just delete it. And now we don't know, it should have had not applicable in it. And instead, I have to go, please put it back and tell me what you mean by that. So don't revise it. Don't make new column headers. Don't add things to it so you can use them in both. Sorry, but just can't double dip there. Questions on that? And it is a separate form that you upload. It's just all by itself. PSS.year month month day day. All right, can be modifications to protocol. So if you were at the PRAF discussion, then ditto. So just because it's on the IPR doesn't mean you don't have the same rigor of information that we need. So I was thinking about when you said, we were going to add, we've been doing this retrospective study and then we found this and we want to use it as a control. In my head, I saw the PRAF that would likely come in. Likely what we would have gotten there is we would like to add control data from the University of Michigan. That's probably what we would have gotten. Not necessarily from you, but that's probably what we would have been told because that's what's happening. They're adding control data from the University of Michigan. But no, really, they're adding 160 participants who are of this age range, and we're getting this data from the University of Michigan. And oh, by the way, here's their IRB protocol, and it's identifiable. So here's a DUA that we're also getting, and we're going to use this to analyze it and compare it against this. That's what we get. But we typically would get, we're adding a control group from the University of Michigan. The same rules of standalone. What would you have said if you had put it in the protocol to begin with at the start? That same rigor has to come here. You have to tell us all that information. Don't include, this is new, so don't include personnel in there anymore. Most of the time at renewal, this is where you're putting it. Not anymore. We're using that e-personnel form. And while you're at that, while you're assessing your personnel, please remove people. Don't just keep adding them, remove them. It's a holdup at this time when you're desperate to keep going. And it's confusing to us when, we get an amendment for so-and-so, we're adding so-and-so from the University of Kentucky, and we're like, wait, isn't he one of our people? Because he's on 17 studies, and it's because he left here and went there, and now they're putting him back on. So remove people. Someone leaves, gets fired, gets transferred, remove them. Training is the #1 delay in renewals. Any questions there? 10C, modifications to consent. Again, same rules, same rigor. Are we all clear though that if you are doing a study that requires consent and you are not making changes to your consent, you do not submit, you submit the consent, but you don't change the date? We all know that? It's not very, I think most people have that now, but I just wanted to make sure.
Your version date only changes when you change
when you
content.
make a change. Any change. If you change F to IRB dash, you have changed your protocol. It has a new version. So any change. But if not, you still submit it and we'll just stamp it anew. But if you are making changes, again, the same rigors as before need to be done. And try to keep up, with the consent changes. Because we try to be lax as possible with all the consent changes. And our consent, I've been here 10 years, I say our consent has changed drastically every year. There has been some very important new thing, typically around confidentiality, but there's been something that's changed. And you don't, just because we're not saying you have to do it right now, you don't want to be that person that 5 years down the road, your form is so outdated that you've now painted yourself into some kind of weird corner or gotten yourself in trouble. So the rules, the regulatory rules change, the regulatory whims, issues du jour change probably yearly, which means our consent changes. So please keep up with them if you can. It's just better for you. Item 12, that's that whole part of, are you on data analysis, long-term follow-up, so on and so forth. So accrual status, we have not yet open, open, and closed. So not yet open, one of the problems we see there is if you have been in that state, not yet open, and the study's been going on a while, the board wants to know why, what's going on. It could be as simple as we don't have funding yet, or we're still working on our infrastructure, or whatever. It could be a very simple answer, but it could also be we can't keep a PI. That is a concern to the board. Forever changing hands, or there's some dispute or something like that they want to know. So if you've been open more than a year and you haven't started, or you've been approved for more than a year and you haven't started opening, just make a note and tell us why. That'll be just one less thing you have to answer. And it may have been the only thing you had to answer. Many overlook, and it's easy to, but if you're open and you say, yep, we're open, we've enrolled 11, there is a part at the bottom that says, what are your plans for future enrollment? If the answer is, we're just going to keep cooking until we hit that 100, then that's fine. But 11, you may be at 12, you may want one more, and just tell us what's going on. This is also a good place, if it says open, and it's been open, not just approved, but open for a while, that says we're ready to enroll. That's what open means, is we're enrolling. And
even though you might have 0 enrolled.
Yes. If you have, it's not unusual for you to open 1 year and still take a year to find somebody. There's a lot of studies where the N is 3. We're just hoping to get 3 in 5 years. But we have 5,000 protocols. I don't know if you guys realize, but last time we spoke, I said 4,500. We just reassessed. It's 5,000. And no more people and no more money. So 5,000, we can't remember that. So it wouldn't hurt to go, no, it's just taking us a while. But more often than not, there really is a struggle to enroll. And sometimes part of that continuing review can be, well, maybe it's because you forgot to tell them on the flyer that you're going to pay them $400. You could add that. That might be a little incentive. Or we've had protocols where they've said, well, we just can't seem to do it. And we work with them on new ideas. We see everything. So we have lots of ways to skin that cat that we can provide guidance on. So my experience is the board wants to know that information. Why has this been open so long and never enrolled? What's going on there? And I will tell you another thing that happens is oftentimes, because we have big heavy hitter PI and then staff, the PI stopped even worrying about that a year and a half ago. Well, PI was like, oh, is that still open? I didn't know that. No, we closed that last year. We just gave up. That's happened more than once. Because you know how communicative they can be. So, you know, you're still doing your job of doing your annual renewals and and they were like, oh no, wait, what study is that again? You know. So they just want to know. It's just a way to kind of figure it out. There have been several times when we've asked about that, and then the next thing we get is a final report. All right, closed. Closed to accrual shouldn't be the date of that IPR. It's not when did you remember you were close to accrual. It's when did you actually close? When did you have your last patient? That's important for us to know. Unless you actually saw a patient that day and then submitted your IPR. And some people are that diligent, and that may be the case. And we don't have a place for this, but we're going to add a place for this. But it would be super, super helpful for us to know we have, it's close to accrual and you have in-data analysis or long-term follow-up. It would be really helpful for us to know whether that long-term follow-up involves research procedures that bear risk versus we're only getting medical data, chart review, or we're doing surveys for the next 2 years. That's the difference between you can move your protocol to expedited and then you don't have to do continuing reviews anymore, or it stays full. But we don't ask that question, that's our fault. But if you think about it, it'd be good to tell us, because then we can say right off the bat, oh, well, they're just doing surveys for the next 2 years, so we can move this to expedited. That's helpful for us. Questions? So item 13, final report. Although the question just asks about data, how are you going to store your data, blah, blah, blah. There may be biospecimens involved, so please include them. Again, these are things we know are wrong with the form and will change, but right now I'm just telling you where the faults are. And this should be a study-specific answer. I know it's tempting to kind of go, the same language that we always use. This is where we store it. This is where but they're not always one size fits all. There may be 90% sizes fits all or fits, but there's the 10% where and it's very different if it's a biorepository or a data registry versus just a regular garden variety study, or whether it's a multi-site study with a data coordinating center or what. And read the note at the bottom of this section that really talks about how you should store and how you should de-identify and all of that. There's a very a good explanation at the bottom that I highly recommend that you read, but it's after the last question. Another genius move on our part. Keep indefinitely is not sufficient. Not keep forever, because you're not going to be here forever, and we just need to kind of know.